Welcome everyone to this is the last OWASP chapter meeting before the summer. We're going to take a break after this one, and we'll be back in September. So hopefully, if you're a meetup member, you'll see when the next events are. There might be a fight club between now and September. We're not sure yet, but as for speaking events, talks, demos, etc., we're going to take a break over the summer. So this is the last one, the one I've been looking forward to. Tonight we've got Sam Stepanian from OWASP London, who's going to come talk to us about Nettracker for Recon and vulnerability scanning. A few slides here. Let me just move on to the next one. So this is one I'll talk about what OWASP is. Tonight we've got Sam Stepanian from OWASP London, who's going to come talk to us about Nettracker.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone who's just joined. My name is Sam Stepanian. You can find me on Twitter at SecureStep9. If you are not yet on Twitter, I actually highly recommend for you to get on Twitter, because it's probably the major social network for cybersecurity professionals. And you don't have to say anything on Twitter. You can just follow people who tweet, and there are lots of cybersecurity professionals. Most of the cybersecurity vendors are there. Lots of white hat hackers, but also black hat hackers are on Twitter. So if you're not on Twitter yet, definitely do check it out. And of course, if you follow me, I tweet a lot of interesting things around application security, about interesting projects, techniques, and news about application security. So I lead OWASP London chapter. I'm one of the 3 co-leaders of OWASP London, and I'm also co-leader of OWASP Nettacker project. And today I'm going to talk to you about how to use OWASP Nettacker for Recon and vulnerability scanning. Few more words about me. I have software development background, so I'm an ex-developer. I work as an application security consultant in financial services in the city of London. So I am a defender. So why am I presenting a talk about a tool which consists of words network and attacker when I'm an application guy and I'm a defender? So my story with Nettracker is interesting because I first tried the tool in 2017. I just saw something called Nettracker appearing on the list of OWASP projects. I tried to run it, and I got a whole bunch of information on screen, which I didn't understand how to use this thing. And basically, I closed it and never looked at it for some time. But then in 2018, myself and one of our OWASP London chapter co-leaders, Greg Frakos, we got contacted by the project leaders of Nettracker, and they asked us to demo OWASP Nettacker at BlackHat Europe 2018 because the project leaders of Nettracker couldn't get to London in time. So for those of you who don't know, there is a BlackHat Europe conference happening every year in London. It takes place in December. And of course, in August, there's a BlackHat USA in Las Vegas. It's quite a big conference with, I think, up to 10,000 attendees attended in 2018, 2019. So the problem that we had with this presentation is because we knew nothing about Nettracker, so we had to learn it overnight. So we got on a Zoom call, spoke with project leaders, and they showed us the tool, and we absolutely loved it, and we presented it. And then this happened. We have huge crowds of pen testers, security engineers, and just people gathering around our stand and just watching the presentation as I was demoing the tool with Dr. Greg Frakos. And we love the tool as well because everybody was intrigued by it. So we said, okay, let's present it the year after. So in 2019, the same thing happened. Even bigger crowd of pen testers gathered as we were talking about the tool. So by that time, I was already a project co-leader and submitted my feedback on quite a lot of features in there. So what is Nettracker and why is it so popular and why do so many people love it? So OWASP Nettacker is just like all OWASP projects, it's an open source software tool. And Nettracker assists with penetration testing by automating information gathering and vulnerability scanning tasks. So it's a pen test automation tool. And because it's written in Python, it can run on Windows, Linux, or macOS, so basically anything which runs Python. Very important thing about OWASP Nettacker is that it's one of the projects which was accepted into an initiative called Google Summer of Code. And if you don't know what Google Summer of Code is, it's an initiative by Google run every year. And it is a paid internship by Google for students. You have to be an active student in university. And this is for students who wish to spend their summer breaks by working on open source project of their choosing. The students have to submit an application form to Google, and they have to say which open source project they would like to work on and why. And obviously then it gets reviewed and Google allocates spaces, and they're paid. I think students get something about $5,000 or $6,000 for that internship during June, July, and August. We have a student working on Nettracker this year with me as well, which is great. And we've been actually quite lucky because Nettracker actually was greatly enhanced by students over the past 3 years. So if you have a child who is a student, or a relative, nephew, niece who is a student, definitely let them know about this initiative because it's really cool. It helps students develop, of course, their development skills, their cybersecurity skills, also understand how to do the research and development under the mentorship of mentors, in our case from OWASP. It's not just OWASP which participates in Google Summer of Code. Most open source organizations participate, so people like Linux Foundation, Mozilla Foundation, and lots of others. But of course, OWASP and several OWASP tools, including OWASP Zap, OWASP Juice Shop, they were enhanced and improved using Google Summer of Code students. OWASP participates every single year, and usually Google Summer of Code starts in March, where applications would need to be submitted, and then the students work during the summer break, during the summer months. So what is Nettacker? You can think of Nettacker as a kind of a Swiss Army knife tool. So just like Swiss Army knife, it's a tool consisting of many tools, which are not necessarily compatible with each other, but can they all be used together? So this is the cool thing about Nettacker, that you can actually use several modules at once, use several tools from your Swiss Army knife, because Nettacker has modular structure with easy to create own modules now in the latest version. It's a relatively fast performing tool. So it has it uses Python's multi-threading to improve the scanning speed. It has something called customizable profiles. So these are the bundles of modules focused on specific tasks. And of course, the great thing about this, there's a command line tool, so you can automate and run this all from command line. So a few caveats about OWASP Nettacker. It is not officially released yet. It's not even in beta quality. It's still version 0.0.2.0.0.3. So I will be demoing version 0.0.2, which is the previous version, for specific reasons today. We're always looking for more contributors. So it is a very young project. However, why is it so cool? Because it already has command line interface. It does have a web UI, web user interface. It has an API. There's a report generator. It has something called Maltego transform. So those of you who use Kali Linux, you'll probably know about a tool called Maltego, which is used for all sorts of investigations. And it's currently has over 70 modules in its arsenal. Where can you find OWASP Nettacker? It can be found on main OWASP website at this address. You can go check it out there. And the documentation, which is very important, is actually located on GitHub. And we use the wiki feature of GitHub project. I know not many open source projects use it, but we use the built-in wiki for all documentation. So definitely check it out. It's been written quite well. I think it's quite comprehensive. You will find installation instructions there, because I'm not going to show how to install the tool, but I do have a video how to install Nettracker on Kali Linux. I'm going to show it a bit later. So what you need to understand about OWASP Nettacker and where is Nettacker in relation to other scanners. So of course, quite a few of you know about scanners such as OWASP Zap and Burp Suite. I'm pretty sure Dave and Martin showed you quite a few of these tools and how to use them during the previous Fight Club sessions here on OWASP Suffolk and OWASP Bristol. But the thing about Burp Suite and OWASP Zap is that these scanners, they scan one website, right? This is how they scan one website for many web application vulnerabilities. And that's whatever the scanner is able to find on that one website. So the scanner goes and discovers all URLs, all forms, all parameters, or buttons, and tries to click on all of them, and then tries to apply various exploits and check for any vulnerabilities. So OWASP Nettacker works differently. So it scans one or many, and that can be hundreds or thousands of IP addresses, networks, or subdomains. And what does it scan for? It's scanning for open ports, and then for one or more specific vulnerabilities which are listed by the user, and you can bundle them in modules. So this is the big difference. So for example, with a tool such as OWASP Zap, you scan one website and you want to find out all URLs where, for example, SQL injection is present, or cross-site scripting is present. With OWASP Nettacker, you can scan tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of IP addresses or websites and find out if they're vulnerable to a particular vulnerability, if they have a specific port open, or if they have a default credentials such as admin. So regarding installing OWASP Nettacker, OWASP Nettacker is available on GitHub, and I will be using version 0.0.2 today, which is the old version. The latest version has a couple of issues because we are making a very big leap from using Python in modules to using YAML in modules. And I will speak about this at the end of this presentation. There's lots of great new features in there. So if you wish to install, please use version 0.0.2 today. Make sure you install dependencies first, depending on which operating system you're installing. With Windows, of course, on Linux, it's a little bit easier to install, and on Kali Linux, it's even easier. But generally, you would just clone Nettacker from GitHub and run pip install -r requirements to install all the Python dependencies. However, if you wish to install version 0.0.2, what you will need to do is you need to click on the releases. You can see these are all the current releases, and go all the way back to version 0.0.2, and then click on assets, and then download it as a zip version for Windows, or tar-gzip for Mac OS or Linux. And once you unzip it, you will follow the installation instructions. So this is the recommended version, and that is the version that I will be live demoing today. So let me go back to what else you can do about installing Nettacker. I have recorded a video on how to install Nettacker on Kali Linux. That was some time ago, and you can just look for that YouTube video, and I explain step by step how you can install Nettacker if you have any issues. That was done last year, so I'm using the last year's Kali Linux, but I'm pretty sure it works on the latest version of Kali as well. So I'm not sure how many of you know about Blackarch Linux. So Blackarch Linux is a specific Linux distribution for penetration testing. And I was very surprised and happy to discover that these guys out of the blue decided to include OWASP Nettacker as one of their tools. So if you download and use Arch Linux, you will discover that OWASP Nettacker version 0.0.2 is already installed there. It is contained in the full installation of Blackarch, and they have this bundle called Blackarch Automation. So it's a part of the Blackarch Automation tools toolkit. So you can find Nettacker there. You can also run Nettacker in Docker. There is a Docker Compose, there's a Docker file in there. You can run Docker Compose. We're trying to get an official image on OWASP's official Docker Hub. It's not there yet, but the problem with that is because we're still trying to get Docker Hub to play nicely with OWASP as a non-profit organization. I think they're currently negotiating how we can work with Docker Hub as a non-profit. So as soon as that is sorted out, it will be available on official OWASP Docker Hub account. Before I move on any further, I would like to remind everyone that OWASP Nettacker is actually an offensive security tool, and you shouldn't misuse this tool nor any other security tool for unauthorized access. And reminder that performing security scans without permission from the owner of the computer system is illegal. So let's talk about Nettacker module types. So if you remember first when I launched Nettacker, I couldn't understand what it does. So here is what Nettacker does. So Nettacker has 3 types of modules. So it performs 3 different types of activities. So it has modules of type scan. So it can perform scanning activity. For example, it can do port scanning. Then it has modules of type vuln or vulnerability scanning. So it actually checks if the target has a specific vulnerability. And that it has several modules of type brute, which is for brute forcing. For example, SSH brute will perform brute forcing over SSH protocol. That's it. So this is the great power of Nettacker. So it's basically 3 different types of scans, just things like port scanning or subdomain scanning or ICMP scanning combined with vulnerability scanning and brute forcing all in one. So these are the Nettacker scan modules. There are quite a few of them. I've highlighted a few of them with asterisk. For example, admin scan will allow you to scan the target web server and try to find any administrative control panels in there using a directory of typical URLs where people put their admin panels. There's a module called CMS detection scan, which allows you to detect what kind of content management system is used on the target system. There's a very useful module called dir scan, and that is effectively performing, well, I wouldn't call it directory brute forcing. It basically will do the same thing that the tools such as directory buster will do, like dir buster. Again, it's very useful because you can combine it with other modules. ICMP scan, of course, will scan your whole network and will find which hosts will respond to pings. PMA scan, PMA stands for PHP-MyAdmin. It's a kind of separated from the main admin scans for a reason. So for those who don't know, PHP-MyAdmin is a web-based administration tool for MySQL databases, and it's usually installed on a lot of servers which have MySQL database for administrators. And the problem with this tool is very frequently this tool is misconfigured. Older versions of the tool didn't even require any credentials whatsoever. Some other versions just had default credentials. It also had lots of vulnerabilities. So for a hacker or a pen tester who is trying to get into the system, if they find an old version of PHP-MyAdmin, that's is always a good find. Port scan is, of course, standard port scan, similar to Nmap. I'm going to talk about it a bit later, and we'll show it to you a bit later. Subdomain scan is one of the most powerful modules in Nettacker. Allows you to enumerate all subdomains of a particular domain, which is great. Wapalizer allows you to use Wapalizer module, which is a module allows you to discover what kind of technologies are used on the target, such as programming languages, libraries, content management system, all sorts of things. So Wapalizer is very useful if you want to do some recon and find out what is running on your target. WordPress version scan is an addition that I've added just to check what kind of versions of WordPress are running on the target. Why is this useful? Because, of course, older versions of WordPress have numerous vulnerabilities, and quite a lot of people are scared to upgrade their WordPress for whatever reason, mainly for compatibility with their custom themes and plugins, and that, of course, makes them vulnerable to all sorts of issues. So these are the main scanner modules. There's also lots of vulnerability modules. We have even more vulnerability modules now in version 0.3. In this slide, I would like to just bring your attention to a few of those. So Citrix CVE vulnerability, there was a massive Citrix vulnerability in 2019 through which lots of organizations got breached. So Nettacker has a module which allows you to basically perform a mass scan of the networks, find out if you have any vulnerable Citrix systems. Same thing with MS Exchange CVE, which was Microsoft Exchange SSRF vulnerability last year was another very, very big one, where a Chinese APT group was exploiting it, and I think there are almost 500,000 of Microsoft Exchange servers got breached because of this. Another very useful module that I will demonstrate today is the server version vuln. It's a very simple vulnerability. It basically shows if the web server is leaking what it's running in the server header, right? Whether it's running an IIS or a particular version of Apache of Nginx. Of course, it's useful to a penetration tester or an attacker, because once they know what version is on the server, that will let him find out what kind of vulnerabilities exist in that version. Another very, very useful and underrated module of Nettracker, but it's a module which helped me find all sorts of bug bounties and also find all sorts of issues in my clients' corporate systems. SSL certificate expired vuln. As it says on the tin, it's gonna find any expired certificates. And why is it a problem if you have a server with expired certificate? If you have servers with expired SSL certificates on them, it most likely means that the servers are abandoned and they're not patched. And of course, if there's something which is not patched, that means it's vulnerable. So it's a very useful module. And another vulnerability module, which is X powered by vulnerability, that looks for another header called X powered by, which usually again indicates a particular version of technology in use, for example, PHP or ASP.NET. So that's the Vuln modules. And then Nettracker has brute forcing modules. So Nettracker can perform brute forcing. And by brute forcing, I mean it's going to brute force user accounts. So you can brute force accounts using FTP protocol, using HTTP basic auth protocol, using HTTP forms, which means basically every single website which has a username and password form on it. Nettracker will find any pages which have, well, if on the main page of the website you have a form with a username and password on it, that's what you use to brute force. There's also HTTP NTLM brute forcing, so brute force SMTP protocol. So if you have a mail service, SMTP service, Nettracker can try all sorts of usernames and passwords combinations to find the one which works. One of the most popular ones is SSH brute forcing. Telnet brute forcing can also be used for older systems which use Telnet. There are quite a few old Cisco kits still kicking around, which uses Telnet, and some other IoT devices which use Telnet. And another very, very useful module, which is WordPress XML RPC brute forcing. So probably not many people know that WordPress content management system has XML RPC bridge. And it is possible to, instead of using the login form, which is usually protected by systems such as web application firewall or some other protections, there is this endpoint for XML RPC, which is usually completely unprotected, and an attacker can perform brute forcing. Nettracker was originally called IOT Scan. This is what is still called on Nettracker, because the leaders of the project, the people who created IoT Nettracker, they wanted it to scan IoT devices and scan the network for IoT devices, then scan IoT devices for any open ports, and then brute force scan for default credentials. For example, admin. I actually use Nettracker as a kind of an IoT scanner, and one of my client engagements, I scanned quite a large bank located in the city of London. I scanned their network IP ranges for any kit which responds to admin, and discovered quite a few of this. And when Nettracker gave me the list, well, it turns out that all these devices were webcams, which were, of course, CCTV cameras located all around the office, and nobody bothered to change their credentials. So, which of course was quite bad, but there you go. That's that is the reason why Nettracker was originally called IoT Scan. It also has a logo, so everywhere where you see this picture, it's actually a logo created for Nettracker. Now I'm going to talk about Nettracker Port Scanner. So Port Scan is probably one of the most popular modules in Nettracker. Pretty sure some of the people, at least on this call today, probably used Nmap, and people usually have love and hate relationship with Nmap. I hate Nmap because I can never remember any of the command line options. So whenever I have to use Nmap, I use it with a cheat sheet. Probably, I think, most people. So Nettacker actually has a very simple, I think, quite understandable way of using port scanner in its module. It can also be multi-threaded, so you can increase its speed, which is of course a bit of a problem with Nmap, which can completely kill your network. By default, Nettacker is actually quite gentle in terms of how many scanning threads it launches, but it can be controlled, so you can add -t for threads or -m, which is how many threads per host you want to basically increase the intensity of an attacker port scans. It's using Python multi-threading, so you have to understand how much CPU power and how much memory you have. Threads work in Python, not to overload it. Sometimes people overload it. I can see all sorts of error messages, and you will need to do the old reboot and figure out that you have to reduce the number of threads. And by default, Nettacker's port scanner will scan 1,000 most popular ports. So these are the same ports that Nmap is using. However, you can add -g parameter, and you can list specific ports to scan. For example, if you want to scan the whole network or subdomain and find out which service are running web service, you can find out if there's port 80 or port 443 open by adding -g and then 80,443. So that's very simple. So how do you run Nettacker? So this is number one problem when you start using the tool. And if you remember at the beginning of the presentation, when I first checked Nettacker, I gave up on it because I couldn't figure out how to use it. I launched it without any arguments, and it just spat out pages and pages of usage instructions, which I couldn't bother to read. So in order to run Nettacker, you actually need to have two parameters. You need to have a target, what are you scanning? And then you need to have a module, what are you scanning your target with? So -i and then the target and -m for the module. So for example, if you want to scan one IP address, you would say -i 192.168.1.149, your IP address, and -m port scan, that will port scan this IP address. And similarly, if you want to scan the whole network, /24 subnet, you will just define the target like that. So the beauty of Nettacker is that it has various types of targets. So first of all, you can define a single IP address as its target. You can also define a range of IP addresses by defining a starting IP address and ending IP address with a dash like this. As I showed you before, you can also use CIDR notation with /bits that many people use. But what is also really, really cool about Nettacker, something that, for example, Nmap doesn't have. So Nmap has this, but Nmap doesn't have this. You cannot scan a domain, and Nettacker can scan a domain as a target and all the subdomains of a domain. It can also scan a specific URL, and that can be an HTTP URL or HTTPS URL. So these are all the various ways how you can define the target. So you can also define multiple targets at once. Why is this useful? For those of you who work for a large organization, you will probably know that large companies, they usually have not just one internal or external IP network. They will have multiple IP ranges, multiple networks. Many companies will have many domain names as well. For example, facebook.com, apart from facebook.com, also has fb.com, for example, right? And then they will have some internal domains as well. So in order to scan all of them, what you can do, you can create a list of your targets, which is just a text file. And you put all your targets in there, one per each line, and that target can be any of the things that I listed before. So it could be a single IP address, range, subnetwork using CIDR bits, or a domain name. Yeah, and then you can just load the whole list of targets. Again, why is this useful? It's very useful if you're using Nettacker for penetration testing engagement or for bug bounty hunting. So that is very, very cool. Before I go into chaining modules, I am actually going to switch to my Kali Linux, and enough of my talking. I need to show you how this tool works in practice. Okay, so I already have Nettacker 002 here installed in my Kali Linux. I can run it with either Python 3 or Python 2 because older version of Nettacker works on both versions of Python, starting from Nettacker version 003. Python 2 is no longer supported because, of course, it's end of life. But I think some of the modules inside older version of Nettacker, they just work a little bit better under Python 2. So you might see me switching to Python 2. So if you run Nettacker without any parameters, like I did originally, you will see this OWASP Nettacker banner, and you will see the usage instructions. There's lots of information. And there's also something called the wizard mode, which asks you lots of questions like a wizard. And I just couldn't figure out how to use it. So now that we are aware of what we can do with Nettacker, let's try to run it. So I need to define a target. So let me see if I can remember the IP address of one of my machines, which is hopefully currently running. I think it's this one, and I'm going to try to do a port scan on it. Let's see if this works. If it doesn't, that means I just don't remember the IP address correctly. Yeah, I remember it correctly. There you go. You can see how quickly Nettacker scanned all the ports on this host and told me about the open ports. So I reported the results in this tabular format where it shows the host name, the port number, which was open, right? Because that means port scan returns something. There's a bit of description here, which tells you what is running on this port. Why is this useful? For example, you can see there's a port 8084 open, but it's running HTTP. And sometimes I can also see some hosts running port 2022 and they're running SSH. So it's quite, there is a signature-based recognition which checks what is actually running. So that's a simple port scan. Can also try to scan something else. Let me try to scan OWASP.org. But what I'm going to do with OWASP.org, I want to use a different module. I want to use subdomain scan. And let me try to do a subdomain scan here. And what this will do now, it will try to discover, and you can see how quickly an attacker found all subdomains of OWASP.org. So for www, CMS, TSD, Wiki, Corella, look at all these are all the subdomains. But the unique feature of Nettracker, and this is why I love this tool so much, and why people usually love this tool so much, is because you can combine things. You can combine subdomain scan with other modules, and you can chain those modules. Let me show you how. So let me first show you the idea of the chaining on the slide. So you can run multiple modules on the same target, and that you need to do for that, you just have to provide a comma. So again, for example, if you wanted to scan OWASP.org with a port scan and then run server version vuln and also do a port scan on only ports 80 and 443, you would do it like that. You would just perform a chaining, which looks like this. So let's actually try to do this. So I'm going to switch back to my Kali Linux, and I am now going to run a port scan and then server version vuln. Okay, and first I will just run it without the additional parameter, and that additional parameter is actually a subdomain scan. So first of all, I'll just run this. Oh, hang on a second. Yeah, it actually came back very quickly, but I want to limit the port scanner just to ports 80 and 443. I don't want the port scanner module to bother to check for any other open modules. So as you can see, we have the port scanner and server version all working together on one target, which is absolutely great. You can see that the server version here was Cloudflare. But what I can do with Nettracker, and this is the coolest feature of it, I'm going to add the -s parameter, and that means scans all subdomains. So what Nettracker is going to do now is going to go and discover all the subdomains of OWASP.org, and then run the server version disclosure vulnerability module on it. And then it's going to run a port scanner on each of the discovered subdomains and provide us with the result when it finishes scanning. If you look at the speed of the scanning, it can be increased by adding more threads and adding more threads per host. And again, if you were running a penetration testing engagement or bug bounty engagement, you would check, of course, with your client, or in case of bug bounty, with the target organization, how many requests per second they allow. So there you go. You can see this is now finished. The scan is now complete. And we can now see all the open ports on the subdomains of OWASP. And I can also see these server versions. So we can see that some of the servers are Cloudflare, there was some Nginx there. But I'm going to improve this even further, and I'm going to add one more module to the mix. I'm going to add X powered by disclosure vulnerability here. So obviously this will also check not for just the server header, but also for the X powered by header. And again, just like with the previous scan, it's going to do it on every single discovered subdomain of OWASP.org. So you can see the discovery of subdomains is now finished, and now it's going to go and perform the scan. You can see that this scan is again slightly slower because now we have 3 modules of Nettracker, or 3 Swiss Army blades working on our target. And again, to adjust the performance, there's always multi-threading options available. If needed, they can be added to increase the scanning speed. So you can literally see how every single target is now being scanned. And I think it's almost finished now. Yes, there you go, it's finished. So you can see this is the textual result that we get, but of course this is a bit boring, this result. So let's read what Nettracker says here. It says report saved in HTML file and database. So this is what is very, very important and unique about Nettracker. Every single scan that you perform is saved in the database. By default, Nettracker uses SQLite database, which is built in, and it sits in a .data subfolder of Nettracker installation. But you can also use different databases such as MySQL or Postgres, and I will talk about this a bit later. But first of all, I want to show you this HTML file where the results are. So let me launch Firefox, because we have Firefox here on Kali Linux. Because I want to take a look at this HTML file. Let me open this, and there you go. You get the beauty of Nettracker, something called penetration testing graph. So what is this? You can see the attacker is starting its attack. You can see it lists all the subdomains, and you can see that in each subdomain, if there is a port scanning or a server version vulnerability or X powered by vulnerability, it actually shows them. And there you go. You can see it like that, and you can zoom in and zoom out. And why the graph is so useful? Because based on the picture on the graph, you can instantly see which hosts are not quite vulnerable to all the vulnerabilities, because for example, I think at least one of them, for example, this one, OCMS, as you can see, did not have the X powered by vulnerability. It only had port scanning and server version vuln. So X powered by returned nothing. So there you go. Just based on the shape of the graph, you can instantly see what is wrong. And then you have the same results in a tabular format, and you can see them all here. So this is your report of the scan, and you can see which subdomains, in this case of OWASP.org, had ports 80 and 443 open using port scanner, which ones were leaking the X powered by header, and which ones were leaking their server version. And as you can see here, server header contained just the word Cloudflare, or there was another one which had Nginx. So they didn't have the version number, which is great, which means that these subdomains actually done the job and they harden it correctly, or by removing the version number from the header. So there you go. This is the report. There's a bit of a visual effect here. If I would like to bring your attention to a particular row in this table, if I just hover over it, it automatically blurs the rest. So this is an HTML report. And now let's have a look at other features of Nettracker. Now that you've seen this demo. So Nettracker has profiles, which are these bundles of modules that you can run together. So by default, these are the profiles which are available. There's info, which only runs the information gathering modules. Scan will run all the scanning modules. Brute will run all the brute forcing modules. Vuln will run all the vulnerability scanning modules. There is a profile called WP for all the WordPress related modules, and one called Joomla for all the Joomla related modules. And there's a called magical profile called all if you want to use all modules on the target. And of course, that will be the slowest scan, but that's how you can perform basically comprehensive penetration testing. Well, they've done the demo, so I showed you the graphs, which is a great feature. Now, apart from the HTML, you can also get output in JSON format and in CSV. Now, JSON is great because you can use JSON as a structured format and feed the results of Nettracker to some other tools. And CSV is great because you can use it in a spreadsheet, which is fantastic. And this is really a manager's dream. You have a free and open source tool from OWASP that you can run on your network. You can run it internally or you can run it externally, and you can find out all the service that you have, all the open ports, what they are running, and if you use vulnerability, the vulnerability detections on them. Again, to do that, what you need to do in Nettracker is, for example, in this particular scan that I've done, if you want to get the report, the output in different format, you just provide -o parameter, and then you specify the name of the file, for example, report, and then dot, and then the extension. If you provide HTML, it will generate the report in HTML. If you provide TXT, it will provide a scan in TXT. JSON, it will generate JSON report. And if you put CSV, it will generate the CSV file. So this is how easy it is to perform a scan and get the result in spreadsheet format, which is, I think, one of the coolest features of Nettracker. When I demonstrated Nettracker at BlackHat Europe 2018, sorry, in or 2019, I think, in London, I had someone approaching me from a very large charity in London, and as an IT manager, and he thanked me because he said that now he's going to use this tool to basically discover all the assets, because as a charity, they don't have much money to buy commercial asset management tools and network scanning tools. As you can see now, the scan has now finished, and the results are now in report.csv. So if I list this file, you can see there's a report.csv here, and I think I have my LibreOffice here. And if I use calc and then try to open report.csv, it's going to open our scan results as a spreadsheet. There you go. So what's in the spreadsheet? You will get scan ID. So scan ID is a unique scan ID generated for each scan. That this is to distinguish in which scan this particular finding occurred. Of course, in this case, I can just hide it because it's not interesting. The username and password columns are used for brute forcing models. So if you use brute forcing modules such as SSH brute force on a FTP brute force, if it discovers a combination of username and password which successfully logged that user in, they will be shown here. So again, I can hide them here because in this report they are not relevant, but port is very useful because this is all the open ports. This is the type of the module used, the date time. This is actually, I think, New York time because my Kali is on the Eastern time, and this is the description. So what I usually do, again, to work with spreadsheet data like this, just do my filtering, and then if I need to find out something, I can just go and say, okay, show me everything which was running on port 80. And I can see all the everything which is on port 80, and of course there's you can do whatever you want. You can with a spreadsheet. Let's go and find out Nginx, for example. There you go. We had Nginx here. So which OWASP subdomains were running Nginx? You can see that was secure flag, and on both port 443 and 80, the server version was Nginx. There you go. This is very cool feature of Nettacker, which is the CSV report. I can show you a few more modules time permitting, but for now, let me just switch back to my presentation. 1 second. I just need to minimize my Kali Linux and go back to my slides if I can find them. Just 1 second. I think I minimized them on the wrong screen. Okay, so this was our lovely spreadsheet. So why is the spreadsheet thing is important? If you don't know who Jeremiah Grossman is a very famous person in application security. He is the CEO and founder of White Hat Security and one of the pioneers of application security. So when we came up with OWASP Top 10 in 2017, and everyone was expecting to see what's going to be in it, Jeremiah Grossman suggested back in April 10, 2017, and tweeted and said that I suggest that OWASP Top 10 2017 includes A0 or asset inventory. These days, the biggest AppSec risk our website you don't know that you own. So what does that mean? It means if you don't know what you own, you cannot possibly secure it. That's why asset inventory is probably one of the first things that cybersecurity professionals ask when they come to an organization and ask to secure it or perform an audit. And I think in the vast majority of cases, if you ask the company, do you have asset inventory? Do you know what you are running, all your servers, all your containers, all your IoT devices, all your CCTV cameras, all your AWS spun up systems in the cloud, they will probably say no. And of course, that's the great feature of Nettacker, that you can get that asset inventory and you can get it into a CSV format or JSON format and give it to people who can work with it. Another great feature of Nettacker is the fact that it has API and a linked web UI. If you wish to run Nettacker in the web UI mode, it's the same as API, you will need to run it with --API command line very simply. And you will need to use API key because Nettacker at the moment does not have a username and password kind of portal. You need to use an API key to log in. I'm going to show you what it looks like, hopefully live. Again, if I switch back to my Kali Linux installation here, and let me run Nettacker. Okay, this is my Nettacker. I will delete all the command line arguments that I used before, and instead I'm going to use --start. Oops, not uppercase, lowercase, please. Start -API. Okay. You can see here, OWASP Nettacker starts and pauses. It tells us that it is running on HTTPS, which is localhost 127.0.1 port 5000. And it says it's a development server. Don't use the production deployment because it's using Flask. But it's okay for us. And you can see there's this API key here. So I'm going to copy this API key. And now I'm going to open my Firefox and navigate to port 5000 of the local machine to see what it looks like. So it is now running using HTTPS 27001. Yeah, port 5000. Of course, because it's using a self-signed certificate, we will be told that it's not secure, so need to accept the risk and continue. If you're using Nettacker in your enterprise, of course, you can install a valid and signed SSL certificate to avoid browser warning. Once you get to the Nettacker web UI, this is what it looks like. There's a bit of a tutorial, which kind of explains to you what every single thing on the screen does. If we try to click on any of the buttons here, none of them will work, and it will say, please log in first. And in order to log in, we need to paste our API key, and we need to click on set session, I will say success, your session has been completed. And now I can click, for example, on results, and you can see every single scan that I performed with Nettracker is actually stored here in the database, and we can access all of it, which is great. So for example, the previous scan that I ran, which is this one, and the nice penetration testing tree that I showed you here, it's all available. It didn't disappear. It's still in the database, which is very, very cool. There's another great feature of Web UI that it has a crawler, which is basically a search engine. So I can do some filtering. So again, if I want to see anything which was open on port 80, I can just type 80. If I want to find out, do we have any Nginx here? Just type Nginx, and it says, there you go, secure flag at Nginx. So this is the search engine, which is very, very useful. And another feature of Web UI, if you look at any of the previous scans that you did without CSV mod, for example, I run this port scanner here. You can see it on OWASP.org. And you want to get the results in a spreadsheet, you can just click on the Get CSV button, and it will go and download the result in a spreadsheet format, which is very, very convenient. So that is on the Web UI. Another, of course, Web UI is also using API inside of it. So if you don't like all this command line stuff, you can use a Web UI for a scanner. So you can click on the new scan, and instead of using command line, you can just define your target. Again, for example, I'm going to say OWASP.org, and here you can see all the Nettracker modules, and you can see the profiles are here. And they are interestingly color-coded. So if I click on vulnerability, all the red things come up, which is all the vulnerability modules, all the scanning modules, so all the brute forcing modules, and then WordPress and Joomla profiles, which you can use. But for example, in this case, if I have OWASP.org and I want to perform some scans, right? So let me go and do, for example, a subdomain scan, right? And that's it. I can just click on submit. You can see it's submitted into API. So the request just goes into the API. Once it is accepted, it's kind of gradually disappears. And then it will be available in the results. When performing the scans, there are also some advanced options available. So again, you can control the number of threads here. You can control the number of retries if connection fails. You can control the time in seconds to sleep between the requests. So this is very important if you're doing either pen testing of a sensitive target or a bug bounty engagement where you are asked to not to overload the target service and be gentle. And here you can define ports. And if you want to use Nettracker using a SOX proxy, you can scan through the proxy. And if you want to perform a brute forcing attack, you can just put all your usernames and the passwords that you want to use in this dictionary. So if you, for example, pen testing a network which might contain some, I don't know, for example, Cisco devices, you would put some Cisco default usernames and passwords here. And there's a box here where you can define some extra module options, because all the modules, they have additional parameters that you can define. So now if we return back to results, you can see there's now scan number 9, which was our subdomain scan. And you can see that scan CMD was through the OWASP Nettacker API. And if we go to some of the older ones, you can see that scan command was the actual command line. So it wasn't through the API. This one was through the API. Again, we can click on it. There you go. These are all the subdomains of OWASP.org displayed either like this in a graph or in a nice tabular format. There you go. So that is our web UI. And again, if I want to come out of it, I can just press Control-C to stop it. Now, a couple of practical applications of Nettracker which were very useful. So if you remember last year, there was a massive attack on Microsoft Exchange servers, and there was a Chinese APT group called Hafnium, which exploited this vulnerability, which is also dubbed proxy logon. And everyone who had Microsoft Exchange service out there on the internet or with Web Outlook, they could have been hacked. So what I did, I actually created a module for detecting this vulnerability. Well, not myself, our team of students helped me out to do this. But I published this blog article telling everyone that they can use Nettracker for detecting this vulnerability. And we had several countries in Europe which contacted us and said, can we use your tool to scan our entire country? Because these were like certs, these were like a country authorities. And they scanned them, and I had at least 2 reports from 2 different European countries. Let's say they were smaller European countries without disclosing who they were, but they actually sent me us thanks, because they said, thanks to Nettracker, we actually managed to scan the entire IP space of our country, and we found a whole bunch of vulnerable Microsoft Exchange service. We contacted the organizations which host those vulnerable Exchange service and asked them to patch. So this is a very good success story. And if you wish to scan for this vulnerability yourself, again, you would just define a subnet that you want to scan and use MS Exchange CVE 2021-26855 vuln as a module. So this was very easy. You just define the target, what you want to scan, and vulnerability, and you can scan tens of thousands of IP addresses for this particular vulnerability. So let's have a look at Nettracker use cases. As I already showed you, you can use it for asset discovery. So you can scan network for open ports, for hosts. You can also scan network for default credentials, such as admin. Again, time permitting, I might show you how to perform brute forcing and see if you have anything replying to admin or some other default credentials. You can also use password dictionaries, such as ROCU passwords, for example. You can scan your entire network for a specific vulnerability, like I show you with MS Exchange CVE. So this, you can scan massive number of IP addresses for just one vulnerability. You can also monitor subdomains and open ports on them, because you can just use JSON format and dump a CSV file. I use things like CI/CD pipelines to do that, and then you can run difference and see if there's anything new on your network. Particularly useful if you want to detect shadow IT and those developers who keep launching some new stuff in AWS or Azure clouds, and you have no idea what you have out there. So that's very useful. Another very useful one is discover expired SSL sites in your IP ranges. It's a very, very useful module, just from pure network administration perspective, but of course from the cybersecurity, application security perspective, finding all your expired SSL certs using a free and open source tool is very good, because if you found those servers with expired SSL certs, they probably have not been patched for a while. So you can also find some assets that you didn't know you have. And of course, you can also find subdomains hosting vulnerable versions of popular content management systems, such as WordPress, Drupal, Joomla. So everyone's aware of OWASP top 10, but there is another top 10, and that's a GitHub top 10. So this is GitHub top 10 of most starred OWASP repos. So those of you who don't know, on GitHub, there is a concept of starring a project, and a star is just like a like, or it's a add to favorite. Basically allows users to add this project to the list of starred repos, and some people use the star to indicate that they like this project, but most people use it as bookmarks, so they can follow what's going on with this repositories and get updated. So GitHub stars is a bit of an easy metric to keep track of, and a lot of open source projects use it for benchmarking how many stars they've got. And if you looked at all the OWASP top stars, you can see that this picture's actually changed, because this is an older slide deck. I think we are now number 7. Again, you can see how many stars OWASP projects have got. You will be surprised that OWASP top 10 is not the top most starred project on GitHub. right? The most popular OWASP project is actually OWASP Cheat Sheet series. And of course, I urge you to check out Cheat Sheet series because it's absolutely great. There's a cheat sheet for every possible use case, and because it's open source. Then second place is Mobile Security Testing Guide, followed by AMAS, which is another subdomain discovery tool, which is also very, very awesome. And AMAS and Nettracker, they can work together, which is great because on some engagements, I would first perform a scan using AMAS, get a list of subdomains, and then feed that as the list of targets to Nettracker. Then there's a secure coding practices for Go language. Surprisingly, that is the next popular one, followed by a web security testing guide. OWASP Top 10 is on the 6th place. OWASP Secure Developers Guide, not GOAT. ASVS is trailing at number 9. Application Security Verification Standard number 10 currently is Nettracker. So and you can always find out yourself by clicking on this link, and you can sort all the OWASP projects based on the Stargazers, and you can see them like this. And yeah, as you can see, Nettracker is still there. Now you can see it's not number 10, it's number 8, beating SVS and not GOAT. So there you go. That's the top 10 from GitHub. And the latest version of Nettracker 003 features YAML-based modules. So you can define any vulnerability or anything you want to scan using a YAML language. You no longer have to program this in Python. So here is an example of a of such module, and you can basically define what kind of protocol you want to use. In this case, you use HTTP. You want to use method get. This is the kind of header you want to inject, for example. This is the format of the fuzzer for the input. These are particular inputs. So those of you who know about this vulnerability I'm showing you, this is a famous F5 remote code execution vulnerability, which was published last year, and that made again a lot of noise. So basically, these are the paths that will be hit using both ports 880 and 443, and then the response condition. Nettracker will wait for 200 response status code, and in regex, how will it know that this target is vulnerable? Because if it sees root etc password file, right? That means that the target device is returning the etc password file, which means it is vulnerable. So there you go. That's the great new feature of the latest version of Nettracker. It is still not quite there. We're still working on it. And of course, once it will be finished, we also changing the database format as well from SQLite and MySQL and Postgres to NoSQL database. So it's likely going to be Redis. If you would like to contribute, you can always check out our developers contributor guidelines. There is a developers page on the GitHub wiki. We welcome all contributions. If you are a Python developer, you can help us with the code, but just like with all open source projects, you don't have to be a developer to participate. You can also just help us with translation, proofreading, documentation, or just use the system. And if you discover any bugs, just raise an issue. So there you go. Nettracker allows you to attack your network before the real attackers do. So you can contact me at samstepanyan@owas.org or SecureStep9 on Twitter.